Absolute value around the x. Okay, this is going to be the harder one compared to the absolute value around the y, and it's very different how it behaves when it's inside versus outside. Okay, so the outside is easy because it just absolute value behaves exactly how we expect it to. We take negatives and make them positive. We fold the negative up above the x-axis. Now with the absolute value around the x, it's different because because it's inside, we have to do it backwards or the opposite, which means we have to use the inverse. Okay, so we have to inverse the absolute value. And we need to make sure we understand what the inverse looks like. So there's a video at the beginning that I showed you, showing you how the inverse of the absolute value works. And that's important to understand how the inverse of the absolute value works. So if you haven't seen that yet, make sure you go back and see that before you watch the rest of this. Okay, so the inverse. How do we undo the absolute value? So first of all, here's our original function. Okay, this is square root x plus 2. Okay, we're going to have this square root function. And we're going to do absolute value of this expression. So we need to know, how does that absolute value transformation work? Okay, so first of all, I want to establish some coordinates for this original function. Okay, so we have -2, 0, -1, 1. Now I've put an extra coordinate here, which is an awkward coordinate, but it's actually important to have. Okay, it makes it easier to do the inverse. It's that point right there. It's the mirror point. Okay, so that little purple dot represents the mirror point. And that mirror point is useful when we're drawing the function. Okay, so there's my mirror point right there. Okay, maybe I'm going to label that to mirror point. This is my mirror point. Okay, so that's where my symmetry is going to be shown when I do my absolute value. So plugging in the rest of these coordinates here, I'm going to have 2 and 2, and it looks like it's 7 and 3. So there it is. Those are my coordinates. Okay, so then I want to know, how do I undo this? Well, first of all, nothing's going to change on the y. Okay, so we're not going to really worry about the y. But what's happening on the x? Well, there's only one transformation that's happening, and that's the absolute value. So we're just going to focus on, what does the absolute value do? So again, if we understand the absolute value works like this. Okay, we have our input, positive, negative input. Okay, and my output is positive. So I need to do, remember the x's are backwards, so I need to not go through the function in this direction. I need to go in this direction. Okay, so I need to go this way. So in order to go that way, there's two things that go on. First of all, I can only put positives through this way. So if there's a negative here, well, I cannot put these negatives through that function. It doesn't work. Okay? So the first step is, I actually have to get rid of that. I got to get rid of the negatives. There's no way those work, okay? Because I cannot put those negatives through there. The second thing that happens is, I'm going to end up mirroring these points, because I'm going to have positive, my positives come out, these positive values just come out this way, but these positive values also come out as negative values. So I'm going to end up mirroring the positives and negatives. Okay, so here's my mirror point. Okay, so it's based on the mirror point is 0, and when I input my positives here, I'm going to end up, nothing changes. I get that, and my y coordinates follow that. But what's going to happen now is, as I go that's those coordinates here. That's as I go through like that. But there's other coordinates that go through going this way. Okay, and those ones I have to end up doing negative. So those +2 and +7 come out as -2 and -7, and the y coordinates that are associated with that follow. So this is what happens when I do absolute value on the x. I mirror from the x-axis. So I get rid of all the negative parts so that this part disappears. That's the first step. The second step is I'm going to mirror these coordinates going that way. Okay, and that's where the plus minus comes in. The positive becomes both positive, so it retains this part, but also mirrors on the negative. So absolute value does two things. It gets rid of negative inputs and it mirrors. Okay, or we take the positive, we mirror it across the negative. So those are two steps that we need to show. Now algebraically it's going to look like this. So my change in x, right, this is my notation. My notation is absolute value x. Remember, that gets me back to my old x's. Well, my old x's can't be negative anymore because I've got an absolute value here. So that's why I need to get rid of that. Okay, so when I undo this, I'm going to end up solving for the absolute value. And I get plus minus square root. Sorry, plus minus x naught. Okay, so the absolute value x gives us plus minus x when I solve it, when I undo it. Okay, and this plus minus means to do things. It means to do two things. So this plus minus means to, number one, get rid of negatives. Okay, we got to get rid of the negatives. That's what happened up here. Secondly, the second thing is you have to mirror the positives. The positives to the negative side. Okay, so that's what the plus minus means when I see it in notation like this. We have two steps to work out. Get rid of the negative, mirror the positive onto the negative. Okay, and it's to do with this idea that we're solving the absolute value, so we're undoing it, which means we can only put in positives through that function, and we're going to get both positive and negatives as my output. And that's why I have this mirroring going on along the x-axis. So it behaves very differently than absolute value around the y. Okay, these are two very different situations, and we have to make sure that we're clear which one we're dealing with. With the y's, it's pretty straightforward. With the x's, we have to be extra careful, because now when we undo the absolute value, the two steps are we get rid of negative, we mirror the positive.